Hello, everyone, and welcome to this very important discussion today on the eve of International Day of Biodiversity. Biodiversity is life, rights of nature, or financialization of nature. We are very honored to have with us four champions of diversity, practitioners, promoters, defenders, and protectors of diversity, all cultural, biological, economic, political, and diversity of knowledge systems. We have with us Dr. Jessica Hutchings, leader and researcher in indigenous food systems and Maori food and soil sovereignty. Frederick Harsch, who heads the Belgian think tank Green Finance Observatory. Silvia Franciscon, who directs the ecological program of the Italian Buddhist Union and is a researcher on deep ecology and rights of nature. And of course, Dr. Vandana Shiva, world-renowned environmentalist and thinker and founder of Navdanya. Welcome and thank you, all of you. This discussion today is also part of our larger campaign and work on biodiversity is life, where we've been working to bring together different aspects of the importance of biological diversity and cultural diversity and how all are pivotal to the ecological future we want. And many of you would have seen some of our recent booklets and reports on biodiversity is life, as well as videos on Voices of Diversity. This time last year, we launched the manifesto, Making Peace with the Earth, which came out by the collective work of the women of the diverse women of diversity that met at the farm in Navdanya last year and talked about how we are all connected through biodiversity. Just as the biodiversity of life connects us all, so does our cultural diversity, our language diversity, and the diversity of our struggles. So as we talked about in the manifesto, Making Peace with the Earth, but also through the discussion in the webinar and today, we would bring out that there are two ways of interpreting and imagining our relationship with the earth and her diversity. One, which is based in the paradigm of extractivism and limitless growth, deeply rooted in the beliefs of the colonial industrialized culture of the contemporary West, which sees humanity as separate from nature and as nature to be exploited for profit or for extraction. And it is this paradigm that has brought us the biodiversity crisis that we are facing today, the sixth mass extinction. It is this paradigm that is destroying nature and her cultures and her economies, as well as indigenous knowledge systems, and is leading to a drastic impoverishment of our planet as well as humanity. On the other hand, is the worldview of the women, of the millions of farmers, of the seed savers, of the indigenous communities, that where we are not separate but part of nature, where we seek to make peace with the earth by cultivating non-violent ways of knowing. And it requires that we listen to the earth and learn from those that came long before us. It sees all life as interdependent. This is the indigenous way, the way of the farmers and the women. And so through this discussion, we hope that we are able to go beyond the reductionist industrial narratives of techno-fixes, of financialization of nature, but show what true solutions are, but also showcase the true stewards and guardians of biodiversity, those that keep the systems of biodiversity alive. With that in mind, let me invite our first speaker, Dr. Jessica Hutchings, who is recognized as a leader and researcher in indigenous food systems and Maori food and soil sovereignty. She is the founding trustee of the Papa Waka Rito Rito Charitable Trust that works to uplift indigenous seed, soil, and food sovereignty, and Hua Parakore Maori Organics through research, development, and community practice. She lives on 12 acres and is a Hua Parakore verified family food grower. She's also a widely published author and a finalist in the 2023 New Zealander of the Year in the environmental category, as well as one of New Zealand's top 50 influential women in food. Dr. Hutchings has been working at the crossroads of Indigenous knowledge and environmental well-being for the last 3 decades and is passionate about Indigenous social justice, organic farming, and self-determination. Welcome, Dr. Jessica. What is the Indigenous paradigm of biodiversity, and how do the Maori view biodiversity, and how do we take inspiration from this worldview?
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation to come and join this panel today. To my fellow panelists, kia ora, greetings, warm Pacific greetings. It really is an honour to join. Dr. Vandana Shiva, tēnei te mihi atu ki a koe te rangatira. I want to really today begin by setting the scene, first of all, to talk about Indigenous people's worldview generally with regard to biodiversity, and then to take us into the Māori worldview of biodiversity through a food systems approach. But first of all, I want to remind us that Indigenous peoples are 6% of the global population, yet we care for and protect 80% of the world's biodiversity. And I think the thing that we need to note at the outset is that Indigenous peoples have been living with nature, as it was said in the introduction, conserving and enhancing biodiversity since the beginning of time. And so our customs, our traditions, the foods we eat, the seeds that we save, and our Indigenous languages are deeply interwoven with the environment and with biodiversity. Well, what I would describe, what I talk about in Māori food systems as our cultural landscape. So not biodiversity, not the environment, but our cultural landscapes from which we come from, but which we also know ourselves to be a part of. We are a part of nature and we don't see ourselves as separate. Ko o te awa, ko te awa ko o, which is a proverb from our Māori culture. I am the river and the river is me. Our worldview is one of everything of being deeply interconnected, entangled, both across the physical and the spiritual realms, and we see time and space differently from Western reductionist worldviews. In fact, our knowledge systems and the way that we seek to understand the world is always about moving our thinking outwards to find the interconnections, as opposed to dividing and reducing the world into mechanistic pieces to form an understanding. The well-being of our cultural worlds and our environments and our biodiversity is about being able to retain the interconnections found with nature. So when one part of the environment is damaged, it affects the whole. And this is Indigenous wisdom passed down through the generations of our ancestors who have lived in close association with the land. And it is because of this deep practice of interconnection between ourselves as Indigenous peoples and the environment that at this point in time, we are absolutely critical guardians of biodiversity. When the modern world is rapidly closing in on Indigenous peoples through capitalist patriarchy, through oil drilling, through mining, industrial scaled agriculture, deforestation, and of course, through the expansion of colonial territories, through biocolonialism and the genetic modification of seeds and patents on life forms. The threats are numerous and they're thick and fast. One of the threats we face with rapid biodiversity loss as Indigenous peoples is the loss of our Indigenous languages and associated knowledges. And there's a clear correlation between biodiversity loss and Indigenous language loss. And when we lose our ability to see and to speak through our native tongues, through the tongues of our ancestors, we face a path of cultural extinction. And it is estimated by some that by 2050, 90% of the current spoken Indigenous languages will be gone forever. And this is particularly relevant in Aotearoa, one where we faced the highest rate of deforestation globally in the early years of the colonial project, resulting in our language being on the brink of extinction. And while many in our Indigenous community have worked very hard over the decades to revive the language, what is concerning for us right now is the rapid biodiversity loss that we're facing through predator incursions and through new pathogens that are potentially going to lead to forest ecosystem collapse. So for Māori, the loss of biodiversity currently that we are fighting really hard to turn around will have a huge impact on our languages. We will be talking theoretically about our relationship with nature, and we will lose the ability to be able to talk about our lived practices in the actual doing of it. If we could just pick up and show that slide that I shared, that would be great. So setting the scene and thinking about Indigenous peoples and our relationship with biodiversity as being a part of nature and the deep relationship that our languages play within retaining Indigenous knowledges can also be seen through this slide here. And what I'm taking you into here is to a Māori worldview. And what you can see in this slide is this is a representation of diverse Māori food systems. In the middle of that image at the top, we have our Sky Father, Ranginui, and grounded below our Sky Father is our Earth Mother, Papa Tuanuku. And on either side of those deities, on either side of our Sky Father and our Earth Mother, are the representations of different tribes around New Zealand and their prized foods or the foods of cultural significance to them. What we know from research that I've been involved in over the last 3 or 4 years in Māori food systems is that Māori food systems are, one, that the knowledges are deeply interconnected, they're bound at place, and so they're place-based and they're localised. They're a knowledge system that go from the mountains, as you can see in the background of the image, right out to the seas. So they take a whole of a catchment approach. They don't just lie within the boundaries of local authorities or the jurisdictions of water management agencies, but actually they follow the native boundaries, the boundaries that our ancestors had set in place. They also are intergenerational. They are what we would describe as they set in place mokopuna decision-making frameworks, where we make decisions for the next 7 generations. So when we think about biodiversity, we have to think about it also too in relation to our food systems and to our seeds and our soils. And when I look at this image, what it reminds me of is that everything is deeply connected, that our knowledges are at place, that actually if we're talking about biodiversity restoration and uplifting the authority or the reputation or the power of Indigenous peoples, then that has to happen at place locally with Indigenous communities. Just also to underscore the deep connection that Māori communities have with the land and being a part of nature can also to be found in our language. The word that we use to describe ourselves as Indigenous is the word tangata whenua. So tangata meaning people and whenua meaning land. So there is no distinction between people and land. We call ourselves tangata whenua, people of the land. Can also to be found in the word for land itself, which is whenua, but also too is the word in our native language to refer to the placenta. So the same word for land also too refers to the same word in our Indigenous language for placenta. In a similar vein, the word for a sub-tribe in our language is hapu, but it also too refers to the state of carrying child or being pregnant. So we can see in our Indigenous languages the instructions from our ancestors of how to be in right relationship with nature. And I'm not going to go into this, we can let go of that slide now, thank you. I'm not going to go into this very deeply, and I hope that some of the other panelists will pick this up, but it does raise questions and troubles up this notion of personhood status that we've had in New Zealand being applied to 3 entities, Te Awatipua, the Whanganui River, Taranaki Maunga, a beautiful mountain, and also to Urewera, which was a national park. But now these beautiful entities or these beautiful pieces of nature have now been described as entities. They've been described personhood status. They have decision-making rights around the table. You know, for me, I think about the order that was given to us in our whakapapa or our genealogy, where actually humans are the absolute youngest sibling in that order. And so then to place our personhood status when we're the younger siblings over our older siblings is culturally something that we would not do. So in concluding, on the eve of Biodiversity Day, I want to remind us that many people today are living on the planet that lack this understanding that many of us who have joined this webinar might take for granted, lack this understanding of our interconnection with the earth and its vast biodiverse networks and the amazing creative self-regenerating and self-organizing systems that have evolved over millions of years to support life. And this is where I say that we have a lot to learn from Indigenous peoples and our traditional knowledge and sustainable agricultural practices, and the notion of living again in a commons with our Earth Mother. And so the Earth is our teacher. And as Indigenous peoples, we are always listening to her. We have always been in right relationship with her because we have always been so close to her through our cultural practices. And it's for this reason that we have a lot to teach the world at this time of crisis and pending environmental collapse, particularly about a return to spirituality and right relationship. And so Indigenous peoples, we really are the last line of defense in saving our biosphere. It will not be the patented technologies of the multinationals that will save us, nor the financialization of nature. It will really be returning to the wisdom of Indigenous peoples and a shared commons with nature in right relationship with our biodiversity. So thank you very much for the opportunity. Tēnā koutou katoa.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jessica. And thank you for reminding us that actually 80% of the remaining biodiversity today is on Indigenous land. And a great food for thought on the personhood status. I think it is something we need to discuss further. On this remaining biodiversity on Indigenous land are the greatest battles of conquest and greed being fought in the name of conservation. It is where their greatest biodiversity lies. And the latest in these schemes is a scheme brought out by the financial sector, making calls for a new form of bioimperialism through the false solution of financializing nature and biodiversity through a market mechanism like biodiversity credit. And as we have seen in the past with carbon credits and carbon markets, this is yet another attempt to commodify whole ecosystems and territories where we have the greatest biodiversity, the territories of Indigenous people. Frederick Harsh, who has worked for 12 years in investment banking, selling currency derivatives, joined the NGO Finance Watch, where he headed the policy analysis team. He now heads the Belgian think tank Green Finance Observatory, which analyzes the ongoing financialization of nature. Frederick, what is happening in the name of biodiversity conservation and biodiversity credits? And what is the state of play today? What is coming in the next months, or even what's coming? Can you please take us through that? And for all of the listeners and those who have joined the webinar, if you have any questions, please do use the Q&A box. Thank you. Over to you, Frederick.
Thank you very much for the invitation. It's an honor to be here. So yes, as you rightly said, a lot is happening on that space, especially over the next 12 months. For those who are not really familiar, I will go through a brief reminder of what are these biodiversity credits, how they work, and what is to come. I will share my screen. Can you see my... No. Right. So biodiversity offsetting, as you said, Roshi, is very similar to carbon offsetting, right? The idea is that some actions would be able to compensate for environmental destruction taking place in a different place in a different time. So we're talking actions such as restoring some ecosystem or etc. This is something that doesn't already exist in a few countries, is about to be implemented on a massive scale, but it's not a new idea at all. I mean, it's been discussed for more than a decade. What is new, however, is that it is about to be implemented politically globally. So if I were to take a very simple example to explain biodiversity offsetting, imagine that you're a company and you want to build an airport over a flamingo habitat in the south of Spain. Well, under traditional environmental regulation, you might be told, no, you must do your airport somewhere else. But under biodiversity offsetting, you will likely be told, okay, you can do your airport, but you need to recreate a habitat for flamingos within 10 kilometers. Now, what is to come is an extreme form of biodiversity offsetting that is in fact much worse, where you would likely be told, okay, you can do your airport, but you need to compensate somewhere in the world, not necessarily in the same country, and not necessarily by restoring the same habitat, the same type of habitat than the one that was destroyed, but it can be another habitat. So in theory, you could restore a habitat for bats in India and claim that you have compensated for the destruction of flamingos in Spain. And so in this way, it is very similar to carbon offsetting, but it's much worse because when it comes to carbon offsetting, right, you deal with 6 main greenhouse gases, right? That are where you have more or less workable equivalencies. Here, you are trying to simplify millions of species with a complex web of interdependencies into a few liquid tradable assets. So obviously that creates many, many issues. I mean, first of all, we do not know the full biodiversity very well. I mean, our scientific discoveries, we're just scratching the surface. And yet, if you want to create a market on it, if you want to put a price on the destruction of nature, you should, at the very least, as a prerequisite, understand, have a complete understanding of all the species and their interaction, which is absolutely not the case. And we are also, in many cases, unable to recreate what was destroyed simply because, again, the science of restoration is in its infancy, and it's extremely complicated and costly to do it. And it's also important to remember that at best, if offsetting worked, it would merely displace destruction, right? It would not reduce destruction. It would not compensate for past destruction. It would enable future destruction by claiming that you can compensate for it. And like I said earlier, the other issue is that it requires oversimplifying and standardizing nature to make it fit into a handful of financial instruments in order to have a financial market. Obviously, there is no environmental integrity in that. We cannot do such a standardization process and have something that merely has any conservation value. And also, crucially, by creating this market, we are doing a massive sovereignty transfer from governments who are democratically elected to private financial markets who are only concerned by definition by private financial gains. And that's a big problem because the priorities of the financial markets, for example, the ecosystem service, that the species and the habitat that they may want to favor may be very different from the ecological priorities. And so we would be giving up our power and our sovereignty to these actors who have no accountability. So that's for some of the issues with biodiversity offsetting, but also obviously it would create the same social issues as with carbon offset, right? It would require a lot of land. And obviously, most of this land is not inhabited land for now. It is the home of some people, and it will create the same issues of land grabbing, forced evictions, conflicts over land use and human rights violations that have been amply documented for carbon offsetting. And we hear also more and more that that would provide additional revenues for farmers. But in fact, what we observe is already in the UK, but in other places, is that it will not bring fresh money, but instead more volatile revenues. Because, for example, in the UK, where it started to implement such schemes, they're in parallel removing farmer subsidies as they put these schemes into place. And so what that means is that revenues will be more tied to financial market fluctuations, as opposed to bringing additional, livable incomes. Now, the reason why this is being done is the same as climate politics. So there's nothing new under the sun. It is not about economics, it's not about biodiversity. The political goal is to delay real action in global north countries in order to protect the status quo. That is the primary goal. So as such, it is similar to carbon offsetting or geoengineering or CCUS. The goal is to divert the political momentum and the public attention away from what needs to be done according to science. And there was this sentence from George Bush Sr. at the 92 Rio Summit that embodied the whole thinking when he said the American way of life is non-negotiable. And it's all in this sentence, right? It means no matter the cost, the human cost, no matter the impact on the planet, on the people, on the future generation, we will not change. We will continue to have an unsustainable way of life. So this is the main goal of promoting these markets. The secondary goal is to create a very new financial asset class for global north countries. And typically countries like France or the UK want a piece of the pie for their financial sector. And you have a figure that has everyone salivating, which is from the World Economic Forum, where they said that carbon and biodiversity finance represented a $10 trillion annual business opportunity. So of course you dangle that figure and a lot of people want to be in. Now, there's three. Where are we today? I would say there's three noteworthy developments. The first one is that carbon offsets was primarily voluntary, right? So it never scaled up. It was never a real market. It was always a niche market. So now that lesson has been learned by the promoters. And there is a massive push to make biodiversity credit markets to be compliance market, which means where the demand is guaranteed by law, which is a massive present to private investors, obviously. We see that in all the instances where this is being discussed. And of course, that would change everything in terms of scale, in terms of land grabbing, et cetera, et cetera. Actually, the same thing is happening now with carbon offsetting, but because of the recent scandals, they have to first go through a first phase of rehabilitating the image through so-called high integrity principles that are absolutely not high integrity. In fact, if you look at the new high integrity principles, they allow 98% of the existing market. So, but that's just a side comment. The second major development that is happening is there's this lie that biodiversity credits are different from biodiversity offset. In fact, this is a very important narrative for them because this way you no longer have to justify equivalencies between what is being destroyed and what is being restored. And that makes it very simpler. But in fact, everybody recognizes that they will be used for offsetting. They have no other use at scale. And even the representative from the French and UK government leading the Mean Initiative acknowledged that it will be used for offsetting. So this is just a narrative thing, but it's important not to be fooled by that. The third important development, in my view, is that in a lot of recent consultations, there's been a lot of emphasis on IPLC participation. But if you look at the framing of the consultation and the imbalance in the task force and the forums, first of all, it questioned, well, first of all, it's not clear that this is a fair and balanced participation and that IPLCs would be able to really weigh on the outcome. What it tells us also is that there is a clear intent to go after indigenous land. I mean, the big focus is there to preempt any criticism of green neocolonialism. And also, we know that different communities have different perspectives, but it seems fair to fear that it will increase tensions within communities. One thing that is really, well, I'll come back to that later also, but there's, when I will speak at what's happening at UN level, for example, there is some misunderstanding sometimes or misframing what's happening. For example, in the UN Biodiversity Credit Alliance, which is one of the UN forums tasked with designing a biodiversity market, you have a group of indigenous leaders who stated that biodiversity credits should not commodify nature nor measure its economic value, but it's okay because they merely seek to value the services. So they make a difference between valuing nature and valuing the services, when in fact, when in the concept of natural capital, ecosystem services are nature. So this makes me fear that they're being a bit misinformed, or there is a, and then they are against offsetting, but they're okay with biodiversity credits, which again might seem a bit politically candid, in my opinion, or misinformed, because if you speak to any insider, everybody recognizes that there is no use case outside of offsetting. So that's some of my concerns. So those were the three big developments that we observe now. And in fact, these markets are moving very fast. The first of this, well, not the first, but the most recent of these markets that was launched was in the UK, right? As of February this year, if you want to obtain a building permit, you have an obligation to offset 110% of what you destroy. So that means, so you can offset by on-site or off-site through some conservation actions, or via the purchase of credits from the government. You do not necessarily have to offset with the same type of habitat or species that has been destroyed. The market, what is interesting also is, even though in theory the scheme is supposed to be UK-based, right? There's a lot of indications that offsetting will not only take place in the UK. In fact, the government explains that they want to export their nature market infrastructure to support the growth of international biodiversity credit markets, and under the narrative that it's to help private finance for low and middle income countries. So there will be international credits, which means it will be the same again as carbon offsets. It will be the global north countries continue to destroy as usual and set up markets on indigenous land or other land in global south countries primarily. It's interesting to know also from the UK example that this is, I mean, biodiversity, sorry, I will not expand on that because I'm already too long, but biodiversity is only one of new nature markets. There are other markets coming up on water pollution permits, etc. I'm happy to speak about it more later. The main initiative that are crucial is the French-UK initiative to create a global market. They expect to launch a pilot market at COP16 in October this year. So this is 6 months from now, and yet most people have never heard of it. There's hardly any media coverage on this. The UN is just another major initiative pushing for the creation of a biodiversity credit market, a global one. And that's another forum that we follow. And the EU is also very active in that field. There is, and I mean, they're pushing for the creation of a global biodiversity market as well, with very biased framing. And then you have a whole army of lobbyists and the World Economic Forum who are into that. I think I've used all my allotted time to speak, so I will stop here, and I'm happy to continue in Q&A section. But these things are really happening. They're happening fast. They're happening in the next 6 months. And there is a crucially missing informed public debate about these issues. Yet, I mean, it's not really difficult to understand why it will not work. but there is a clear need to raise awareness and spread the message. Thank you.
Thank you, Frederic. And as Frederic said, things are happening very fast, and Navdanya International is also working with Green Finance Observatory to bring out awareness of this issue, and there is a large alliance mobilizing together against the biodiversity credit, and also at the COP16, coming up COP16. So those of you who are interested also in allying, in being part of this mobilization and campaign, please do keep in touch. And we will be sending out some fact sheets and videos over the coming days that also Green Finance Observatory has made. And then we'll be making some fact sheets together on this issue for those who are interested. Thank you, Frederic. And we will come back in the second round to also talk about some actions and mobilizing on this issue. Next speaker I have is Silvia Franciscon. Silvia, Frederic talked about the next iteration of the same exploitation in the name of conservation that we have been seeing, the financialization of nature. And on the other side, we have rights of nature. And you've been doing work in Italy and in Europe on this for a long time. And so please take us through some of the work that you're doing here on rights of nature and how it is rooted in deep ecology, as well as the alliance of water communities that you are working with. Thank you so much. Over to you, Silvia.
Thank you, Ruchi, and hi, everybody. Yes, let's try to be a little bit more optimistic after Frederick's presentation, which is really worrying. I have to say that what we are doing is nothing new. We are tremendously inspired by the indigenous people all over the world. And I think we have to recognize that and express gratitude for the path they have showed us. So inspired by them, and also inspired by the local communities in our areas that may not know about, the legal definition of rights of nature, but have developed and have embodied that kind of relationship with the earth, being a river or being a mountain. And I have to say that at some point, in Italy, I was investigating about deep ecology and rights of nature for some time, both through the Italian Buddhist Union, but also as a researcher at the New Institute Center for Environmental Humanities at the Ca' Foscari University in Venice, together with some colleagues. At some point we said, but, we had this feeling that people were, as I said before, embodying the concept of rights of nature. And they really were living that relationship with the earth. So at some point we thought of counting who we were. We were working on this from a legal perspective, from an artist perspective, and also from a local community perspective. So we gathered last year in December in Venice, and we very much focused in that area. At the beginning, we thought we could try to work for the establishment of rights of nature from a legal point of view, also in the Lagoon of Venice ecosystem. But we realized that there is not just, a lagoon ecosystem. We realized there are communities working from the Dolomites to, the river, through the rivers and to the lagoon. And we ended up being together with, again, legal people and artists and activists who have been doing this for so long time, but maybe they felt alone in this struggle. And we decided to create an alliance, which is called IDRA, which we like very much because it reminds me also of the intranet, which is very dear both to the Veda and the Buddhist scriptures. And it's this net where is essential, where every single knot is so important and essential. So we gathered together and we established this alliance, which is called IDRA, which stands for Iniziativa Diritti Reti d'Acqua in Italian. And we decided to create working groups to work and to see how we can eventually reach the outcome of the recognitions of rights of nature in the area that goes from the Dolomites to the lagoon, without considering it an entire ecosystem. And of course, we, as I said before, we were inspired by indigenous people, but also by the work that our colleagues even in Europe eventually did, especially with the Mar Menor in Spain. This is a great achievement of some of the colleagues in Spain, the first European ecosystem to be recognized of value and of dignity of rights. We are in the process now to organize the second confluence of European body water bodies. The first one was in Mar Menor. The second one will be in Venice, hosted in Venice. It will be preceded by a mini campus, a university mini campus on deep ecology and rights of nature. And we will visit legal people, artists, activists, the Piave River. We will listen to the river. We will listen to the river and we will learn from the river. We want people to be there and to talk to the communities, because this whole idea of rights of nature is not just a legalistic thing. It is very much the relationship of communities, how they live, their interaction with the elements of nature. So of course, we are going to have this second event on European water bodies in Venice, and you know, we will also screen the movie I Am the River Is Me. There was just, Jessica mentioned this important Maori contribution that is really fertilizing also our culture. So again, thank you so much for this. The question is, what we do in concrete terms. We are thinking of having an European alliance gathering also signature according to a precise procedure in Europe. The European bodies and institutions have to deal with the issue if we will be able to gather 1 million signatures in at least 7 countries. We will have elections, as you know, in Europe very soon. October, we will have a new commission, a new European Parliament, new, political scenario in Europe. But we very much are confident that we will be able to gather those signatures, also through the work that we are doing with some artists that are very much willing to put their, visibility for this. There is another bit of optimism, including the CBD. You know that I think it was a couple of years ago, for the very first time in the CBD history, COP's history, rights of nature entered the decisions, which of course we know are not binding decisions, but yet we could see some movements there. And together also with the financialization that we have just heard. Frederick mentioned what Bush Sr. said in 1992. Sometimes I think we were much wiser in those years, because besides what Bush Sr. said, we were able to put together a declaration that today I would be very, very grateful to see implemented. And I think we are very much going backwards instead of implementing those principles, such as the polluter principle, especially the precautionary principles and the different, common but different responsibilities. We need to ally, I think, in order to renew that movement that brought to Rio, and of course, considering everything that happened in the last decades. And the other day, May 19th, was called the overshooting day in Italy, meaning that Italy has consumed all the resources that it has at disposal. And even some green media people and newspaper were talking about this. But again, we need to be very careful the language we use. I don't understand how we can even consider that there is a day according to in which we have consumed all the resources, because the idea, the concept behind this is that we are completely allowed to some point that we decide in whatever manner to be able to exploit or overexploit our resources. I even think we should stop talking about resources and start talking about sources of life. That's why we are doing this confluence, besides the overall outcome of having the recognitions of rights of nature. Rights of nature are just an instrument. In Sanskrit, we would call it upaya, an instrument which is useful for a change of mentality from anthropocentrism to biocentrism. This is why we want to talk about the deep ecology in the universities, in the schools, within the movements, including the green movements. Because as I said before, some of the narrative about exploitation of resources belongs also to some of the environmentalists. So I thank you so much. I'm very happy to answer your question if you have any about our initiatives. But of course, I'm very much look forward to listening to Dr. Shiva as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sylvia. Thank you. And with that, I invite Dr. Shiva. Dr. Shiva, you started in Afghania 40 years ago when you saw the threat to seed and to diversity, then from the big giants and the big ag. And you've been talking about how we have two paths. We either are going on the path of destruction, on this path of the financialization of nature and the newer and newer avatars of exploitation, or we listen to the regeneration path, the path that have been shown to us by farmers and seed savers and indigenous people, the path of regeneration. And you championed the movement of earth democracy with Navdanya. How do we embody this? How do we connect this?
Thank you very much, Ruchi. Hello to all the dear friends who have joined the webinar, and to everyone who has joined. A very, very happy Biodiversity Day. Defending the integrity of biodiversity is our challenge. And yes, Navdanya I started 40 years ago. My biodiversity work I started 50 years ago. Both my quantum theory as well as my activism showed me that the idea of mechanistic separation is so artificial. Everything is connected. And it's really from joining the movement Chipko 50 years ago as a volunteer that I understood the amazing shifts that were taking place, that had taken place in colonial times. And at one level, one could say that what Frederick described is the final step of the colonial imperialist path. Because what the women were resisting was the commodification of the forests. And they used to say, you think these forests are timber mines that bring you money? For us, they're life. They bring us life, they bring us soil, they bring us water, they bring us pure air. They even added in the early 70s, the pure air that the forests bring us. And now, of course, the world is catching up with the whole ecological services. They reminded the government again and again that the whole flow of profits by extraction of timber was very, very different from the flow of life. And this interesting thing was the same year when Chipko got the Alternative Nobel Prize in 1987, an economist got an economics Nobel Prize. And I'll never forget this. He's Robert Solow of MIT, and he got the prize for saying that in effect, nature is totally dispensable. We can constantly substitute real things that give us life with artificial things that bring us money. And he said the world can, in effect, get along without natural resources. So exhaustion is just an event, not a catastrophe. And the substitution of the real life that biodiversity brings us with new and constructs, with financialization being the latest, just every time their last construct starts to get exposed, at that time Chipko exposed colonial forestry. And we undid all the assumptions. Then they came up with new terms. Interestingly, the word biodiversity didn't exist when we were working 50 years ago. In fact, the first movement we started in India to start organic farming was called, or the group was called the Association of Protection of Indigenous Genetic Resources. The word was genetic resources. Biodiversity evolved later, got firm with the Convention on Biological Diversity, to which Sylvia has already mentioned. And what I've learned in these 50 years is a combination of my quantum background and my experience with communities. First, that biodiversity is self-organized and autopoietic. It's derived from the Greek word auto, which means self. It is life in self-organized complexity, collective agency, evolutionary unfolding. Can't be fragmented. Jessica described it so well, that you cannot separate humans from the ecosystem of which they are a part. And you can't separate different parts of the ecosystem to extract either raw material, or now the functions are becoming the new raw material. It is self-formative, it is interactive, it is interconnected, it's dynamic, and that's why it is life, changing every moment. The understanding of life, of living systems and living organisms, has totally converged with my understanding of the real world as being an entangled world, but not just being an entangled world, but being a regenerative world that does not create pollution, that does not create entropy. As Schrödinger, a quantum physicist, said, addressing what is life, so living systems have negative entropy, something they haven't understood yet. And from the molecule to the cell, to the organism, to ecosystems, to Gaia as a whole, life is based on non-separation and quantum coherence. Diverse organized species and organisms are interconnected through mutuality and symbiosis. And we talked about this in our manifesto on Making Peace with the Earth, that all of life is about flows. There's nothing like static, separated entities. And all of the flows are flows of life itself, of the water, of the energy, of the food. That is why I say biodiversity weaves the web of life, the infrastructure of life. These days, when you talk infrastructure, they're talking about highways and ports. They never refer to the infrastructure of life that biodiversity is weaving. Most importantly, biodiversity is not an object. It is not a thing. It is not a number. And I'm saying this because in the early days, the same people who wanted to put making money at a higher level than protecting life went through, I have it in my book, Ecology and the Politics of Survival. They created a system called willingness to pay. The World Bank would interview people on New York streets to say, how much money would you be willing to spend to protect how many species in the Amazon? But why don't you ask the indigenous people of the Amazon of how much they care? Why don't you get the values that 80% is being protected by a culture? Why don't you get that culture and not assume that the culture of profits, money, power is the only culture It's a perverse culture that has been ruling for a while. So it's not a number. And you can't just say this much is worth it. And I remember another, when Frederick was talking, he was talking about how you can, offset and do credit. And now anywhere in the world, with any ecosystem. But I've seen the failure in India of destroying native forests for something called compensatory afforestation. Huge money in that place. All the compensatory afforestation is dead eucalyptus trees. They just count the planting. And anyway, they cannot reproduce the amazing artistry of nature's evolution in a complexity of diversity. Biodiversity is not a resource to be exploited. It is what defines us. And it is not a genetic mine to be patented. This is what has guided my work in Navdanya. And at one level, one could think that just like financialization today is leading to an ontological error of trying to equate the flow of life with the flow of money. But money cannot grow a forest. Money cannot run a stream. It's the care for the local communities. It's that which is keeping ecosystems alive. 80% in the 20% where your indigenous people are. Again and again and again, we need to repeat this. And Frederick, I would request you to make a really bold cartoon on this, on how the 1% has destroyed everything, and that tiny group of indigenous people and small-scale farmers and women are keeping alive what little is still left in their hands. Definitely, as you said, biodiversity is not a financial asset to be traded in a global financial casino. We have seen how even the financial world, these casinos collapse. We saw the 2008 collapse, where the subprime crisis led to the whole world in crisis. And I'm so glad, because India had very strict capital controls, we totally avoided the crisis. But I saw the Southern Europe, I saw Italy, Greece, Portugal, Spain go under. Biodiversity is interconnectedness. You can't chop it up. And through the biodiversity flows of food, nutrition, water, oxygen, breath. It's the endosomatic energy that keeps this planet going. So we have to address a very, very deep ontological error of equating fake things, artificial construct, with the real flows of life. That's our work. That's our work, because the majority of the people in the world understand life for what it is. They understand living soil gives them food. They understand pollinators. Just the other day was the World Bee Day. The pollinators give food. People understand. The little children are understanding. It's just this handful. I mean, two groups, McKinsey, the very corrupt consultant, and World Economic Forum, just launches and said, we've got, the whole credit solution. But what's really serious is we had a whole intergovernmental system that evolved the Convention on Biological Diversity. And as Sylvia said, the two big principles that came from Rio, the polluter must pay, and the precautionary principle. We should apply the precautionary principle to financialization. What are the risks of resource grab? From those who have protected, we're seeing these conservation grabs all over the world. So I think a big part of our work is to connect all the movements from the different streams. In any case, everyone here today comes from different backgrounds, and we are sharing our concerns. And for me, financialization, the intellectual property are all part of the same baggage of just pinning something and saying, oh, no, you didn't evolve the basmati rice, we made it. And seed, it's our invention. It's a machine. It's not self-organized. And this redefining of the living world into a dead world with either flows of money and more extractivism. The financial asset companies, I remember at the time of Glasgow, they have worked out, Rockefeller and New York Stock Exchange have worked out, if you put all of nature into financial assets, they think they can make $4,000 trillion of profits. That's what they're looking at. While the rivers die and the forests disappear and the flamingos have no home, it's this falseness we have to address. And bioimperialism is really about creating false stories and trying to impose them on the world's mind just through power. I think it is time for us to rise and say, no, we don't take your fake stories. We have the earth to guide us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And as you said, one of the biggest ways is the creation of false stories and false narratives. And a big part of our work is putting our stories, and not react on the narratives and the framing that they are creating. And that is a big part of our work and our challenge. And we look forward to working, Frederic, on some of, I think you're going to be working on a graphic novel too, on on this issue, because really this needs to be ridiculed as to how I mean, it's just insanity. It's absolute insanity. We are at 6 o'clock. We could maybe, we have a lot of questions, so we could start taking some questions, and while we answer, maybe we could also come back and react to, unless somebody has one, if you want to react immediately, we could come back and react also to what each other has said, some of us have said. Maybe I start with the first question. Dr. Jessica spoke about a powerful dynamic about personhood where we are seen as the youngest sibling. Could she clarify about how this dynamic developed and the risk involved?
So is the question about the dynamic of how the dynamic of personhood status developed, or the relationship as us as the youngest sibling? Maybe I'll actually start there, because for us, that's an ancestral instruction. And our work as Indigenous peoples is to follow through on the instructions of our ancestors and then to pass them on to our children and their children and to the future generations to come. So it's very clear in our creation story, the order of humans. And this isn't something that I'm making up or that we've sat around as Māori people going, okay, well, what are we going to do? These are actually us taking our ancestral instructions in our whakapapa, in our genealogy that we recite in our cultural narratives and in our traditions. We are the last species to be formed, humans. We are the last. We are not of the godly realm. So it is not for us to place the minor rights of humans into the realm of the atua or into the realm of the deities. And so, you know, we talked about you mentioned the river, the Whanganui River, which has been granted personhood status, that has a very deep spiritual significance to the tribes that live up those rivers. And while we reach for these legal instruments at this time of deep environmental crisis and deep crisis of the erasure of Indigenous rights, I can see the value that they have, but it also too pushes up against our own cultural understandings of our right place in the order of the world, which is actually to be in service to nature, to be a part of nature. We do a very poor job of looking after each other as human beings. And so to ascribe personhood status to these entities which have such deep spiritual significance, I think is a conversation that we really need to have and to trouble it up, because I see this movement taking off and I see it in Indigenous communities taking off. And I think while it takes off, it also too takes our attention away from some of the really concerning things that I've heard today. And you know, Dr. Shiva, it's always about connecting up the movements, and I really appreciate you saying that. And I really appreciate Frederic hearing about biodiversity credits. I want to share this information back with communities, Māori communities in New Zealand, that we need to be right in front of this. So we always have to come back to where things started for us. We're only here for a very short period of time, and our job is to carry those ancestral instructions forward, not to mess with them, not to tutu with them, as we might say in our culture, but to carry them forward intact as possible so that the next generation has that very clear set of instructions as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Jessica. Indeed, this is one of the aims of also having these discussions and platforms is for us to connect, is for seemingly diverse, from diverse backgrounds. But if we don't, we need to get ahead by connecting, both geographically, but also issue-wise. And that is one of the key aims of Navdania's work and meetings like this. So we'll definitely need to ally together on this. I have lots of questions on credits and offsets by anonymous attendees. It would be great if you give us their names, so that way we can also connect. But maybe I'll pick up a couple of them. If biodiversity credits are not used as offsets, if they're not fungible, would they be an exciting platform to deliver capital to indigenous people and expand positive impact for biodiversity? Do you want to take this, Frederic?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Well, first of all, I would say that the case has never been made that market mechanism would deliver superior outcomes when compared to traditional environmental regulation. So on what basis, on what ground do we deem it necessary? Do we hope that would lead to superior outcomes? I mean, that's, as long as the case is not being made, I don't see the point of trying to set up these complex schemes, etc., etc. Now, we also know that regulation, traditional environmental regulation, is the most effective way and the fastest way to shift private capital towards conservation. Why? Because just any regulation, by definition, will affect the expected future revenues of the impacted sectors, right? And private capital flows will shift mechanically to the new expectations of profit. So if it is about funding, regulation, again, is the most effective way. So I don't see anything particularly new or more exciting into credits. And then finally, and I think it's a crucial point, there is no way that these credits will not be fungible and they will not be used for offsets. I mean, that's a narrative that is being peddled, but if you look at the details, even the proponent of the credits, the one who claimed they will not be used for offsets, do linguistic acrobatics. I mean, I had it on some of my slides, explain that a company should not use credits for offsets, but it could use it to compensate some of its damage. Like, really? What's it? So there's a lot of, and even, for example, the co-chair of the IAPB, who is leading the charge to create this market, explains that she's against wide offsetting, but she supports offsetting within a mitigation hierarchy that is never implemented. So even the proponents of credits are really not clear on the distinction. And also when you speak to potential buyers, you see that nobody wants to buy these credits if they're not used for offsetting. That's because that's where they derive their appeal. So yeah, sorry, that's a very long answer to the question.
Thanks, Frederic. And if anybody else wants to come in, please feel free to add.
Let me just come in to say, every time any imperialism appropriates our real resources and our real wealth, it always brings us a few glass beads, a little bit of money, and says, what you have is worth nothing. We even had a Macaulay who said, we got to convince the Indians, who are the richest country of the world, that what they have is inferior and the rubbish we bring them is superior. And therefore, if we are talking about where the biodiversity is protected in indigenous areas, and we want to convince them you're poor, by shifting the gaze from biodiversity and the cultural diversity to the financial asset markets. That is the ontological flaw I was trying to point out.
And sorry, if I may just, like I said earlier, what we observe is that it will, in most cases, not bring much fresh money. Instead, it will replace subsidies, it will lead to more unstable revenues. And we also see, for example, in other contexts, that this will replace loss and damages funding. And there's a real political element here. Basically, global north countries have zero intention of giving fresh grant money. And the recent loss and damages fund, the fact that it's managed by the World Bank is a clear indication of that. And so instead, what they're saying is like, look, that's all you'll get. So do you want this conditional financial instrument or nothing? Of course, history tells us that, you know, if we organize and reject this, maybe there's a hope for a better outcome, but that's a longer conversation.
Thanks.
One
A
comment, if I may?
question for,
Sorry,
yes,
Ruchi.
go ahead, please do.
I think every
do.
time governments decide to put new funding on new funds, especially climate, we need to be very careful. As Frederick was saying, it is very unlikely that it is about fresh resources. It's just, you know, just reallocating money that is already supposed to be there. In terms of ODA, I talk for Italy, for example, is going down and down, even though there are big announcements at COPs, at climate COPs. And I think that we'd also be to be very careful and see how the Piano Mattei is going to develop in Italy, because there is also a rename of renewable energies, including biofuels, which basically is land grabbing. So just a warning to keep eyes open also to the next G7, which is going to be in June, 13th, 15th of June in Italy, where the Piano Mattei will be very much pushed forward. Just to say, every time they talk about resources, it's never fresh resources.
I just also too just wanted to add one thing, and that is that the ongoing co-option of Indigenous peoples into these systems, and then the difficulty that we face then to have to kind of unschool and unlearn Indigenous communities when you have some of these leaders who have been bought off by corporations or by governments or by these false promises. And they actually reside in these places of power within our tribes. It's the Indigenous hegemony, you know, it's our own Indigenous capitalist patriarchy that we have. And, you know, that's the battle that we face within our Indigenous communities. It's twofold. It's not only against the corporations and capitalist patriarchy, but it's also to battling against some of the views that our male Indigenous leaders hold, because they're in cahoots with the corporations, they're in cahoots with the capitalist patriarchy. And we have this happening right now in New Zealand with the push of GMOs coming into our country. And I've just watched a couple of videos of some Māori leaders really saying this is the opportunity for Māori, you know, that we need to be at the forefront of this, we need to be controlling it, you know, AI will be able to help us. It's like it's really complex. There's lots of levels that we need to fight. So I'm very happy again to be joined up in movements, because it's a hard battle to develop the critiques in isolation down in Aotearoa. So thank you.
But there is also another comment: be aware of the language of rewilding and its connection with biodiversity credit markets. This is something I think, Dr. Shiva, you've also warned us about, no? Because a lot of that language is also going towards farming without farmers in the name of rewilding, and the name of is also an attack on agriculture and farming. And there is an interesting.
So, you know, I've always
another question
seen,
maybe for.
Maybe let me just mention this. I always see bioimperialism or all imperialisms coming from the violent separation of people from their land, their ecosystems, their cultures. And I've called it ecological apartheid. And there are those who still adopt ecological apartheid to say nature and humans are separate. They can never live at peace together. And they don't look at all the cultures that live at peace today. And so they have to get humans out. They've defined humans as the problem. And I've always said, no, it's greed that's a problem. It's a handful of billionaires who are a problem. It's limitless taking and extraction that's the problem. And wherever people live within nature's limits and nature's bounds, they themselves are part of the wild. That's why we need to revisit the language of rewilding without humans.
Absolutely. Maybe this is a question, I don't know if Sylvia or Jessica, who decides the rights of nature? Who decides what's best for rivers and forests? Would these not be human perspectives, or who decides? And I'm going to just take a bunch of questions and then perhaps we could come in. This is a question for how can we learn from nature to transform economic systems, for Dr. Shiva.
Jessica, you want to go or?
I'm happy just to make a very quick comment about it, and that is that for us, it would always be the local Indigenous communities at place that would have the mana or the authority over the rights of nature. So like it's the tribes up the Whanganui River, Te Awa Tupua, who made that decision. And that's what we call, they have the mana, they have the authority to be able to do that. Thank you.
Yes, this is what happened around the world when rights of nature and personhood was recognized. We have guardians and custodians who act on behalf of, of the river or the ecosystem. Let me say something about this, though. Rights of nature in many countries have been recognized through legal system, which are the Western legal system. And this can create and has created problems for some of the indigenous people who have different kind of legal systems. And I think that also within the movements for rights of nature, we need to have this conversation in order to acknowledge all the legal systems, not only the common law, not only the civil law, which is our system, right? The jurisprudence, the constitutions, etc., which is great if we can make, if we can achieve the recognition of rights of nature in ecosystem in this way, it's a great achievement and we should celebrate. But we should also include the way indigenous people settle things from their own, through their own judicial system. And I think this is a conversation that should be held also within the rights of nature movements. It is a conversation we had in Siena, I think that was 2 years ago, when the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature, GARN, met and came out with the declaration, the Seeds of Siena Declaration, which is a beautiful declaration, and I hope everybody can read. And it is conversation that I think we will have also in Venice at the second confluence, which, by the way, will be, of course, also organized with GARN and the Embassy of the North Sea and other organizations. But I think it's important also to see which legal system, because we cannot go on thinking with our own way of thinking in the Western world, I think.
Another question related to economics. I think we have time for two more, and then perhaps last comments. Shouldn't we be modeling our accountancy and economic tools on nature rather than trying to develop schemes that continue to leverage the existing ecocidal forms of these tools? These tools are hand-down products of the separating mechanistic European Enlightenment thinking that we've had for the last 500 years. And in the current form, they simply serve the 0.1%. Yes, indeed, that's what we've been talking about, yes. And how can the indigenous diverse cultures be included in our legal system is another question. How can we access the connection between indigenous and us? These are some last questions, and a question to everybody: how do we young people join this, and what can we do to help? May I start with the last comments from all of you, maybe with Jessica?
Thank you. I always think the first place to start is with ourselves and our own relationship with nature. And so, you know, to rangatahi or to young people, in terms of where do they start, it's about how do we come into right relationship ourselves with nature, and what does that actually mean, and then what does that look like, and then how then are we the ripple within our own families, and then, you know, in my case, in our own sub-tribe or in our tribes, and then out into the wider world. How, you know, we're a drop. And so how can we drop it, and then how can we ripple it out? And not to carry the weight of the world on our shoulders, but to know that we're with other people in movements, and to join movements, and to stay informed, and to keep developing our critique. Thank you.
Frederic, any last comments? Or
I mean, there's a lot that can be done. I mean, in fact, spreading the word and raising awareness is extremely powerful. I mean, if each of us today, for example, speaks to 5 people, shares some material, etc., these things can grow. And, you know, and ultimately, I believe that it's a battle for public opinion. And once you reach a critical mass, then you can alter the course of this or these schemes. So I don't think we're powerless. I think, and history again shows that a minority of dedicated people can also have a significant impact. So yeah, I strongly believe that with all these schemes, all this financialization, it's fairly easy to understand why it will not work from stopping the extinction, why we recreate the same issue that we've had. It's a question of really raising awareness about it, and we each can contribute.
Sylvia?
Well, there's so much to say. I think the thing I would say to the young people, for example, is to make alliances, but think with their own heads. Changing the narratives means to be critical towards what society is telling you to do and to think. We have been heard that, for example, is the precautionary principle would mean to have a 0 risk. This is totally untrue, you know. So study, do the hard work, and study, and see, and be able to counter argue what they tell you, because it is easy. It is easy. There's so much untruth outside there. Precautionary principle has never had nothing to do with 0 risk. Our life cannot be 0 risk. It says something very different. So, you know, there is this building of narratives, and we need to think with our heads, not with what they want us to think. This is the advice I would give to the young people.
Thank you, Sylvia. Yeah, indeed, it's actually a built amount of lies. That's all they're able to do, and it's very easy to make it apparent. That's one of our key endeavors, is to show that it's really a lot of nonsense, and the answers are very clear too. And that is one of the key key parts of Navdania's work. Dr. Shiva, final can you close this for us? And what should
there was a question on how do we learn from nature, how to have economies that work for nature and people. Because right now, this economy is destroying nature, and all of the credits and offsets are merely new ways of destroying the earth while making everyone look at assets growing in the financial system. We just have to see what's happened to housing in Canada and the United States. All taken over by BlackRock, and people are on the streets. So the same kind of dispossession will now be brought through all these systems to the indigenous people who are taking care of the earth's resources. Now, the two principles I have learned in my 50 years that nature uses and evolves, one is diversity. Nature never works in monocultures. And the second is nature never extracts without giving back. Everything is a cycle, it's recycled. Howard called it the law of return. And the same then applies to our relationship, the right relationship. Because yes, rights of nature, but because we are related to nature, those rights translate into our responsibilities. And without the discussion of human responsibility, we'll never get it right. After all, the rights of nature grew out of the Rights of Mother Earth Declaration that Bolivia took initiative on after the collapse and destruction of the climate treaty in Copenhagen. We have a whole book. It's published as Reclaiming the Commons in America, and it's published as Origin in India. And people asked, so how do we bring in the other laws? While bringing in all the laws that got excluded. After all of the laws of the West came out of how do you take land that is commons and turn it into private property? How do you take seed that's common and turn it into intellectual property? How do you take rivers that are commons and turn them into this much hydroelectricity and this much futures trading? Now, each of these has amazing indigenous systems, and we need to map them, and we need to bring discussions and dialogues on this. And 25 years ago, when we faced the whole patenting of seed, that's when I, realized that we have to have communities involved. Please look out. On 5th of June will be 25 years of when we started the Living Democracy movement. That they will always steal our sovereignty. Our work is to defend it in new creative ways. And that is my most important message to the young people. We've always been made to separate ourselves from nature on age, gender. And all of the indigenous teaching says all of unjust appropriation is either a theft from nature and the resources that need to cycle in nature, or from other cultures, or from future generations. All three, the colonization of nature, culture, and the future is one colonization. That's why we have to join hands.
Thank you so much. And indeed, we are joining hands, and we will be in touch over the next days, the whole team of Navdanya, for not just mobilizing on this, but also the call to action that we will launch every year from the 2nd of October to the 16th of October. 2nd October being Gandhi's birth anniversary and civil disobedience, where we say no to the GMOs and the financialization of nature, but also 16th of October being World Food Day, as celebrating the real economies, celebrating the real food sovereignties of and biodiversity. So we will be in touch, and thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jessica, Sylvia, Frederick, and Dr. Shiva. And thank you to the Navdanya International team, Prerna, Carla, Elisa, and Neha for putting this together. And have a great day. Thank you so much.